What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, we're going to talk about the fixture postponements for Game Week 8. Of course, in Game Week 7, we had no fixtures at all. Luckily, that is not the case for Game Week 8. So we are going to get some FPL. We'll talk about which fixtures are postponed, what that means for FPL, players we should be looking at targeting, taking hits, using wildcards, maybe using the free hit as well. And I'll also end by looking at my team and what my initial thoughts are for the plans there, whether to use transfers or maybe use my wildcards. So if you enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a like, hit that subscribe button if you are new around here as well. So there are 7 games that are being played this week, and there's 3 games that have been called off. Now, the fact that the Premier League have obviously been talking to kind of the police and stuff like that to make sure which games can go on, and they've officially announced this now, you would assume those 7 games will definitely be on. I guess there's a chance, just with everything going on in the UK right now, that more of them get called off, but I think it's very unlikely, right? You don't put out an official announcement or statement and then kind of change that later on, right, in just a few days' time. So I think these 7 will be on. The postponed games, Chelsea versus Liverpool is probably the biggest one from an FPL point of view. Some people will have Reece James, Cucurella. Maybe some of you have already bought in Fofana, for example, Mendy, etc. And then obviously Salah, Trent and Diaz have been very popular. So you could be missing kind of 4 to 5 players in that game. Man United versus Leeds, maybe not so much. But obviously some people have started bringing in Dalot, Rashford. Maybe some of you have got some Leeds players. Probably unlikely there's many of you out there. And then Brighton versus Palace, which we already knew was off. Now, some people are probably saying, well, why is Chelsea, Liverpool, Man United, Leeds off, but none of the others? And I don't want to sound like an expert, right, because I'm not. But from all the reports that people have been talking about, it just sounds like they are very heavily policed games, and there's just not enough to go around right now to make sure those matches are on. And the ones that are on obviously need, at least what it looks like, they need less policing. With Brighton and Palace, some people are saying to me, well, that was called off because of the train strikes. The train strikes aren't happening now. Why can't that game go ahead? I assume it's just a logistics thing, right? If you tell everyone it's off, they cancel plans, hotels, travel, and that kind of stuff. I know, obviously, that it's not like Brighton and Crystal Palace is that far away, but it's still a bit of a hassle. To then put it on with a few days' notice is just not ideal for either club, probably. So that's probably why it's not been put back on. Again, I don't know for sure. I'm just kind of speculating. But also, neither of those teams are in Europe. So that can easily be rearranged later on. It's a little bit harder for the teams that are in Europe. The most interesting games that are on are probably Brentford versus Arsenal, because I think a lot of people have got 2 to 3 Arsenal players. So that's going to save a lot of people who are worried about having to free hit a wild card this week. And also Spurs versus Leicester. So I don't know if many people have Spurs players, but the likes of Kane now, Son, Perisic, if you've got them, they're pretty decent options now for Game Week 8. And obviously, if you wanted to take like a 1-week punt, going for Kane or Son against Leicester, that looks like a pretty good fixture right now. So there is going to be some FPL this week. Game Week 8 is going to have 7 fixtures. Let's look at my initial thoughts. So wildcard is definitely still going to be the play for some of you this week. If you were thinking about using it in Game Week 9, bringing it forward 1 week is not that big of a deal. I think Game Week 8 wildcard teams will look pretty similar to Game Week 9 wildcard teams, unless there's loads of injuries over the international break, but that's not necessarily something you can plan for. And look, Game Week 9 is a good time to use it. Game Week 12 is a pretty good time to use it, depending on what your team setup is. But if you're having to take like a -8 or a -12 this week to get to 11 players, there's no real reason to actively look to put off using your wildcard. If you can get to 11 players without a hit, or maybe even just a -4, and you really want to use it in Game Week 9, then fair enough. But I wouldn't go out of my way to avoid using it this week. It has to be used by Game Week 16 anyway. Using it a week early is not going to be a massive issue. With the free hit, I would try and avoid using that if you can. I think it is going to be way more beneficial to us in the second half of the season. We've just seen all the fixtures get called off in Game Week 7. So there's likely to be a massive double game week in the second half of the season. I think there'll probably be another one as well. There's also going to be other blank game weeks to contend with too. Now, I know some people will say, why should we save the free hit for later on in the season for a blank game week when we can make use of it now? I prefer using it when you can kind of plan what's going to happen. So usually in the second half of the season, we have blank game weeks like this, but we know they're coming. And the thing with chips is it's not just about the points you gain in the game week you use it, it's also how many points you can gain outside of that. So if, for example, in game week 30, I don't know which game weeks are going to be the blanks, but let's say it's game week 30, and there's players in there that I just don't want to carry in my team because they're just not going to be good outside of those weeks. I can have better players in game weeks 27, 28, 29. I can free hit in the worst players and just have them for that week and then get my good players back. So it's not just about the points I gain in that week, it's also about the points I gain afterwards. Whereas for this week, this has just been brought on us like with a few days notice until the deadline. I think for most people's teams, they're not going to only have like 4 or 5 players. You might do, but if you don't, then I would probably just take some hits and get some players in for long term. So either you've got the wild card, in which case you should definitely use that instead of free hit. And if you don't have the wild card, taking a few hits with some good players for game week 8 and onwards is definitely viable, right? If you're going to wild card either this week or next week, I should say, and like Liverpool players you want long term, but they're not playing this week, you could definitely remove them. So Salah to Son, Salah to De Bruyne, I don't know, Trent Alexander-Arnold to Trippier, for example. And then if you wanted them back next week, you could definitely wildcard them in. Hits definitely become more viable now. So if you've got players not playing this week that you don't really want long term, and you can bring in a good player this week that you do want long term, that hit suddenly becomes way more viable. I think for the most part, people haven't been taking a huge amount of hits so far this season because we've all just had like players from the top 5, top 6 teams, and we just let them be in our team for the first few weeks. So we haven't needed hits, but this is a situation where that kind of changes. I'm not saying go out and take -16s, -20s, but they definitely become more viable in this kind of situation. And obviously, just to kind of reiterate, a wild card in Game Week 9 does give you the international break, which could be handy, but I don't think it's a deal breaker to have to use it this week. If you can get a good team out that's good for like next 4 to 5 weeks, perfectly okay to use it in Game Week 8. Now, I will do a separate wildcard video for Game Week 8 specifically. That will probably be tomorrow. This is more just an initial thoughts type of video. But if you're thinking about wildcarding, or you're trying to use transfers because you don't have the wildcard, you've already used it, these are the teams that you should probably be looking at targeting for players that have good fixtures from Game Week 8 onwards. Now, with Leicester in particular, I don't think there's a huge amount of options there, but James Maddison is definitely someone that I will be looking at from Game Week 9 onwards. So it's a little bit awkward if you had to bring him in this week because Spurs away is obviously not a great fixture, but from 9 onwards he looks pretty good, and I think he takes up one of those midfield slots at a time where Kulusevski could be rotated. Obviously you could look at Foden if you wanted to. Diaz is about to have worse fixtures for Liverpool and could be rotated a little bit more with the fact they've got Jota in that back as well. So I think the £8 million-ish midfielder slot, especially for like Saka for example as well, the fixtures are about to get bad or they're just not getting the minutes. Foden might be the only slight exception to that. So Maddison's a good option. I think for Fulham it's just Mitrovic. For Newcastle you're looking at Pope, Trippier and Isak are probably the best options. If you prefer to go for a different goalkeeper, you could potentially double up with like Trippier and Shah in defence, but I think when I look at the players that I would want in my team, I don't think I want to take them up with a second Newcastle defender, so I'd probably go the Pope Trippier route if I wanted to double up. Aston Villa are on that. I know a lot of people are going to kind of turn their nose up at that, but if you wanted someone to kind of cover specific fixtures, Luca D might not even be that bad of an option. I was looking at wildcard drafts earlier and he did make it into a couple. Game Week 8 obviously is Southampton at home, pretty good fixture. I think the only issue is 9, 10 and 12 where they got Leeds, Forest and Fulham. They're all away games. If 1 or 2 of them was a home game as well, I think it'd be a little bit better. So that might put me off a bit. You've got Watkins as well, but I just think it's very tough to warrant putting in Watkins when you've got Haaland, Mitrovic, Isak as well. Obviously not Jesus now. So I suppose there's not... It depends who you want. Like Tony could be an option as well. There's lots of forwards is what I'm trying to say. And I just don't know if Watkins is one of the ones I would want. The fixtures are definitely there though. Southampton, Leeds, Forest and Fulham, all really, really nice fixtures for an attacker. I just think if I'm looking at I'm probably going to have Haaland, Mitrovic, and then from if I was wildcarding, probably Isak, maybe Tony, but it could even be Solanke as well. 5.7 million, nailed on 90 minutes penalties. He could be a nice option to let you spend money elsewhere. So I think Luca Dean and then possibly Watkins are the only ones I'd look at. And then West Ham, we just saw Bowen in a European game take a penalty. There are players that weren't on the pitch like Lanzini, but I think Bowen might keep penalties now. So I know he and maybe West Ham attack hasn't been brilliant so far this season, but the fixtures are there. Everton away, Wolves at home, Fulham, Southampton and Bournemouth all by game week 13. Pretty nice fixtures. Only 8.1, nailed on, going to get good minutes and could have penalties. So you could look at him, maybe Sofao as well if you needed a defender. Again, the thing I like about Sofao is, look, if you're struggling for players this week, okay, Everton away is not ideal, but it isn't that bad. Then you go straight into Fulham, Wolves at home, then Fulham at home. So if you needed a defender for this week, who then can maybe bail you out for game weeks 9 and 10, I don't mind him either. I know a lot of people are going to be looking at Emerson now. He should be nailed on. A lot of West Ham fans seem to think that he should be, at least, but the ones I've spoken to, they're not 100% confident he's going to start every single game. So that's my only concern. But if he does, he's very, very cheap at 4 million, so you could consider him as well. So again, just some quick thoughts on my team. I'll do like a whole team selection video and stuff on this later on this week once I've digested all the information, looked at all the possible routes that I could go. But I think I'm in a little bit of a tricky position where it only takes me a -4 to get out 11. So I don't need to wildcard. But again, do I really want to take a points here? And how much better could I make this team if I wildcarded? If I was having to take a -8 or a -12, I wouldn't even question it. I'd be telling you right now, I'm definitely wildcarding. Here's a first look at my draft. But I think it's tricky for me. So Isak, for example, is someone that a lot of people are going to have on their wildcard team. And look, Bournemouth at home is a really good fixture for Newcastle. Fulham away and Brentford at home aren't bad either. But then they do quickly run into some trickier fixtures. So I don't know if I'd even want Isak long term. And obviously this week I've got Jesus anyway. And I don't think Jesus away to Brentford is that much worse than Isak at home to Bournemouth. So that doesn't really worry me too much. I think a lot of people are in a position where they got Sanchez and Ward as their goalkeepers, so they're having to play Ward against Spurs away, which isn't ideal. For me, I've got Ederson in goal. Now, it's not a home game. It would be even better if it was, but Man City defence against Wolves away, having the double up, that seems pretty good. And I think a lot of people are going to wildcard out of that. Now, to be fair, they're probably going to go for Trippier and Pope, which against Bournemouth at home looks pretty good. But I don't know if, again, I actively want to get rid of my Man City players. So I have to play Andreas. But if I'm going to play him, then against Nottingham Forest is the week to do it, right? I think my triple Arsenal is perfectly okay against Brentford. I've already got Trippier in. I've already got Mitrovic in as well. So it's just really the two Liverpool boys that I've got to deal with. And I can do it two different ways. I could do Salah to someone like Son. And if he gets rested in the Champions League, that probably means he's going to start at the weekend, although I'm not quite happy about how he's playing right now. But he could be a bit of a punt, so I could do that move. I've only got one free transfer, of course, as well, because I used 2 last week to get in Mitrovic and Trippier. So I could do Son in against Leicester at home, knowing that I wouldn't keep him long term anyway, so it would just be a punt against Leicester. And then that would give me 1.2 million to spend. So I could do Diaz to kind of any £8 million-ish midfielder. I can't get a Man City one in because I'm already tripled up with Ederson, Cancelo and Haaland. So it probably would have to be Bowen. Unless we knew that Kulusevski was going to start and it was going to be Kulusevski and Son, I could go for him. But I'd only do that if I knew he was going to start. Otherwise, it probably has to be Bowen. Again, I can't go for Saka because I've already got triple Arsenal. So I'm kind of a little bit stuck in what I can do. The other option is to not play no, what formation am I on now? Let me just double check. Yeah, instead of 3-4-3... I could play 4-3-3 instead. So again, I do that Salah move to Son. And I know everyone's going to say, don't go for Son. He hasn't scored anything. He's been rubbish. And I agree with that. But Leicester at home is such a good fixture. I'd always back anyone pretty much to do well in that fixture, especially someone of Son's quality. And then I could just get rid of one of my defenders, so Cucurella or Dunk. And if Perisic is going to start, get him instead. So instead of having that extra midfielder in there, I would play 4-3-3, Trippier, Cancelo, Gabriel and Perisic, and have him for Leicester at home. Because obviously we know what he can do, right? Always good for defensive returns and attacking returns as well. So that's an option. And then I would wildcard in game week 9. The thing that I'm asking myself is, why am I delaying that wildcard? Is there enough there to warrant not using it? I wouldn't have a bench, so I'd be taking a -4 for 11. If anyone misses out, I'm going to then be down to 10. If someone else misses out, I'm down to 9, etc. So that is a bit of a worry, not having a bench. And I know if I wildcard, I can just void that -4 and get the team that I want. I could have players on the bench like Zaha if I wanted to, who's got good fixtures from game week 10 onwards, so I could still plan ahead. It's just whether or not I do it. So it's just initial thoughts. I'm not going to go into it too much more. That's kind of where my head's at. I think the -4 is right now what I prefer to then give myself the international break to wildcard. But in the back of my mind, I'm still thinking, why are you taking a -4 when you're going to end up wildcarding anyway? So I'll see what I do. That is it for this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to give it a like. Hit that subscribe button if you're new around here. We'll have videos again as normal from tomorrow onwards. So I have wildcard, transfer tips, team selection, game week preview, all that stuff ahead of Friday's deadline. If you have enjoyed that, make sure to give it a like, hit that subscribe button, and I'll catch you again soon.